It was the Clayoquot summer of '93, another season of conflict in the forests of British Columbia. A summer when protesters tried to block logging roads and loggers tried to block protesters. A summer when violence often threatened, but no one was hurt.
Just one more time, I ask you, please let us through.
A summer when almost everyone exercised restraint, including the police. It was a summer when some people cried for the trees, and others celebrated their right to cut them down. Most of all, it was a summer of failure for the environmental movement, fighting to protect an old-growth forest. Failure despite the arrest of hundreds of people and the constant attention of the media. Every working day for 3 months, the blockades went up, and every working day except 3, the logging trucks got through. Year after year, for the last 15 years, environmentalists have campaigned for the preservation of the temperate rainforests of Clayoquot Sound. It's an ecological treasure chest. Ancient trees, plant and animal species, some of which flourish nowhere else on the planet. The Clayoquot summer began last spring. Environmentalists thought they had an ally in Premier Mike Harcourt's NDP government and expected Clayoquot trees would be declared off limits. But the industry wanted those trees and lobbied hard, too. The government characterized its decision as a compromise.
Those who are on the extremes, who say preserve it all or log it all, aren't going to be happy with this decision.
The ancient forests in almost 2/3 of Clayoquot are going to be logged, all the areas marked in red. The green areas are preserved, just 1/3 of Clayoquot lands. This was a major defeat for the environmental movement. Over at Macmillan Bloedel's Vancouver headquarters, they weren't proclaiming outright victory, but the forestry giant was satisfied, says spokesman Dennis Fitzgerald. What did Macmillan Bloedel want going into the Clayoquot Sound decision?
I think we had the license for the entire area, the logging license. And so we probably wanted to be able to log as much of Clayoquot Sound as feasible.
Was there real concern that the company could have been shut out of Clayoquot Sound completely?
Sure.
Would the best case scenario for the company to have gotten permission to log all of Clayoquot Sound?
Well, from a logging standpoint, that would have been the best case scenario. Would the public have accepted that? No.
Macmillan Bloedel prevailed because in Clayoquot it maintained cutting rights to one of the province's most valuable stands of old-growth forest. This victory was no accident. For 5 years, the industry fought for the right to cut these trees by using a public relations strategy against its environmental foes. The industry's battle plan involved the mobilization of thousands who make their living from the forest economy. On an August Saturday morning, 1,500 loggers, truckers, and their families converged on Ucluelet, a logging town on the west coast of Vancouver Island, not far from Clayoquot Sound.
We've been under a lot of stress here lately with the environmentalists, and it's nice to see the support for our side.
We that live in the communities that pay the taxes in this province are gonna make the Clayoquot Compromise work.
Let's do it. Give change a chance. Just to give change a chance to work. We gotta do it.
This grassroots revival is the newest political force in rural BC. They're small-town folk and proud of it. They call themselves the Share Movement, and they are the shock troops in the battle against environmentalists. They support Clayoquot logging because they believe logging means jobs. Their leader is Share BC's director, Mike Morton.
We have just about 33,000 members now, and we seem to be expanding our borders. A lot of support from across Canada.
We are an advocacy group. We're concerned about environmental values. We're concerned about the economy, and our purpose is to promote community stability by supporting the principles of sustainable development. That is our statement of purpose.
Dennis St. Jacques and his wife Diane run a restaurant in Ucluelet and are active in their local SHARE chapter.
We didn't have a voice as a community. You know, the environmental movement, the big companies and the government were talking and making decisions all around us, and nobody was even asking us our opinion. And that was the main reason we formed as a group.
Now it's up to you and me to save our...
The SHARE theme song is pre-recorded, and the members are happy to sing along. The song also makes the forest industry happy. It founded and funded SHARE. Today, even though they sing the same tune, the SHARE movement denies it has any formal ties with the forest industry. SHARE was founded in the late 80s when the forest companies' reputations were at an all-time low.
How do you continue to be a forestry company, loggers, in a day and age when people don't like logging? That's a tough one. All of a sudden we found ourselves caught up in a political struggle, and that's something that we didn't have any experience at.
McMillan Blodell had to improve its hand, so it sent some executives down to Reno, Nevada to attend a meeting, the Wise Youth Leadership Conference.
Look at the back messages that are on here.
The American Wise Youth Movement gave birth to the SHARE movement in Canada. These people represent thousands of Americans who make their living from the land, loggers, miners, cattle ranchers. They believe their freedom, their livelihood, their very way of life is threatened by environmentalists and environmental laws. These people are not Democrats, and they're certainly not going to take it anymore.
But ladies and gentlemen, despite the fact that environmentalism is politically correct, despite the fact that it is the darling of the guilt-ridden, mindless Hollywood celebrities, in the last election in 1992, every single environmental initiative in every ballot all across the country, even in Massachusetts, went down to defeat.
The brains behind the Wise Youth Movement is this man, Ron Arnold, Executive Director of the Center for the Defense of Free Enterprise in Bellevue, Washington. Ron Arnold is the American right's most effective weapon against environmentalism. He's an activist, a consultant to industry, and author. His latest book, Trashing the Economy: How Runaway Environmentalism is Wrecking America. What was the origin of the term wise use?
We want to use resources because people can't live without using resources. And we want to do it wisely so that we can promote and support economic growth.
What is wrong, in your opinion, with the environmental movement and its leadership?
The environmental movement really isn't what it seems. It's not saving the earth. It's killing jobs and trashing the economy. Every single law that's drafted and lobbied into existence by environmentalists and environmental leaders hurts people in some definite way. It either regulates them out of making a profit if they're a small business or a big business, doesn't matter. And without profits, you can't survive. It takes private property away from people, and you find the most outrageously deliberate statements. We can't save nature until we eliminate private property, coming out of environmental groups. Where's your food, clothing, shelter, and fuel going to come from if you believe that everything people do harms nature? That industry, the big bad wolf, is destroying nature. Where are you going to get breakfast if you destroy industry?
The first Wise Youth Conference was held here in Reno in 1988. 40 people from British Columbia came down. Forest industry executives, loggers, truckers, municipal politicians from logging communities. That conference gave them something they desperately needed, an effective strategy for fighting the environmental movement back home. One of the community leaders who embraced the Wise Youth tactics was Jerry Fernie. He's the mayor of Port McNeill, a logging and mining town at the north end of Vancouver Island. He learned a lot in Reno.
We found out there that there should be some system whereby we could get information out to people as to the importance of the forest industry and all these other resource industries and the dangers of listening to the extremists in the picture. That was our concern.
So you came back and you set up an institute.
We created a group, a little study group from that session, and that group resulted in being the board of directors of the British Columbia Environmental Information Institute. And in turn, the members of our group have gone out and spoken on behalf of the resource industries and the concerns that we have, and helped to form share groups.
Ron Arnold, the Wise Use leader, also gave the forest industry strategic advice.
Industry cannot save itself by itself. It needs citizen allies for the simple reason, who's ever going to love big business? I mean, that's a joke. I've said, look, industry, you take your money, you give it to one of these grassroots groups, and get the hell out of the way, because there's no way you're ever going to convince people. Let the people who it's going to affect tell that story.
What he and others, I think, told us, and he came up here at one time for a meeting, was that you're up against volunteer organizations that feed on the enthusiasm of their volunteers. So what you have to do is to find some way to identify people who would be your advocates, and move to empower those people. And so that was the genesis of the share movement. Who are your potential supporters?
The industry hired someone to round up more supporters. Patrick Armstrong was well known for his fight against environmentalists in logging disputes in the Queen Charlotte Islands. He also knew Ron Arnold and was connected with the Wise Use movement. One of the first places Armstrong organized a share group was in Port Alberni, a Macmillan-Bloedel mill town that processes the wood from Clayoquot Sound. The Member of Parliament for Port Alberni is New Democrat Bob Skelly.
Macmillan-Bloedel went along to all of its operations, shut down the operations, told the workers in those operations that the environmentalists were going to take away a third of the land base, forest land base in this region. It was going to result in a loss of jobs, and M&B offered money and assistance to set up share groups to people in each one of those operations.
Skelly was there the night plans were hatched to start the local chapter of SHARE.
I attended the first meetings called by Bob Finlay, the Chief Executive Officer of Macmillan-Bloedel. Booze and food spread out so you you could enjoy as much as you want. He brought in people from Share the Stein and Pat Armstrong, the major share group organizer throughout the province, who does a great deal of work for the Forest Company in organizing those kind of things. The strategy that they were working on, and it became pretty evident at that meeting, was total war with the environmentalists.
Is it ethical for the industry to fund so-called citizen groups who downplay their affiliation with the industry?
Sure, I think it's ethical. I mean, it's not something you can buy. You can sort of facilitate it and pay a few of the bills and things like that. But it goes only if people want to make it go. So it's not something you buy. You can help them out, and certainly we've done that.
So what'd you do?
You give them some seed money. And that's pretty much been it ever since. It's been, you pay, some amount of money so people can pay their phone bills and, run their fax machines and stuff like that. And then you've got a volunteer organization that, sort of works on the, enthusiasm of its own membership.
How much money did they get from the industry, and Macmillan-Bloedel specifically?
Right now, I think it's in the neighborhood of about $100,000 a year.
If they're willing to fund us, terrific. Whatever we receive, there's no strings attached, whether it's forest industry dollars or Joe's garage down the street.
Well, my question to you then is, why would the forest industry fund you unless it was in their interest to do so?
Well, there's obviously some commonalities of interest. We want to see a healthy, sustainable forest industry, and they want to see a forest industry. They may not be funding the Western Canada Wilderness Committee because they might not want any forest industry.
The link between Share BC and the forest industry is such a touchy subject that one member of the Ucluelet chapter walked out of our interview.
Did you know that Ron Arnold advised Macmillan-Bloedel to set up citizens groups to front for them to get the message out?
No, I'm not. I'm really not aware of that. When was that?
Mr. Arnold told us that in an interview, that that's what he advises industry to do.
Mm-hmm. No, I'm not aware of that. That's good. Terrific.
Do you think that's why the industry funded you?
Again, any money that we've accepted from the forest industry, there's absolutely no strings attached as far as our association with the forest industry is concerned.
So this is
They
a
have,
gift. It's a gift.
I'm sure it is. It's
I'd like to
of
understand.
course
Mike
it is.
Morton is an employee of Share BC. The local members are all volunteers. They resent any suggestion they are in the industry's pocket. Dennis St. Jacques.
I must make sure you understand that I come from a small community that relies on natural resources. Forestry is one of them. Yes, I am pro-industry. Yes, I want to make sure there is a land base out there for this community, for the community of Tofino, for the community of Port Alberni. These are industry towns, M&B industry towns. Now, why on earth shouldn't I or any community agree to accept money from the industry that they support themselves?
Look, I don't want to really criticize the share groups because I think there are people within the share groups who have a legitimate interest. But there are actions that have been done by Macmillan Bloedel, by the Forest Company, who are simply using these groups to bolster the company position, which is that the company wants to retain control over as much of the resources they possibly can.
Let's cheer your man up there now. The Green Team.
While the Share movement is the Forest Company's strategic ally in rural BC, in the city they've created another organization. It's called the Forest Alliance of British Columbia. It was all fun and games in June when the Alliance opened its new public information center in downtown Vancouver. But its purpose was serious: to save an industry that was losing its footing because of its terrible public image.
We got them both wet that time.
The forest industry needs the support of millions of urban voters who can't tell a hemlock from a Douglas fir.
But they're doing a fine job.
3 years ago, public confidence in the industry was at an all-time low. Mass circulation magazines were criticizing British Columbia and its forest practices. The forest companies knew they had a public relations crisis on their hands. Bob Nixon, editor of the newsletter Forest Planning Canada, has watched the alliance from its beginning.
The Forest Alliance was created to deal with environmentalists. The genesis of it was 13 companies sat down, said, we've had Forest Forever campaigns before, we've had all sorts of millions of dollars of campaigns, and we have to bring in the top guns if we're going to protect our land base, meaning the public land in our control, to keep it under our direction.
The top guns were Burson Marsteller, the largest public relations firm in the world. The company has made its name advising corporations involved in environmental disasters. When Exxon needed help to deal with an angry public after the Exxon Valdez spill, and when Union Carbide needed help after the Bhopal disaster, they called in Burson Marsteller. The Forest Alliance of BC wasn't only the brainchild of the world's largest public relations firm. Burson Marsteller actually created the alliance. Together with the forest industry, the PR company hand-picked the alliance's key employees, its executive director and its chairman. In fact, the alliance's first executive director was a Burson employee. He still maintains an office here to keep an eye on things for the forest industry.
My name is Gary Lee, and I am the executive director of the BC Forest Alliance.
Gary Lee was the Burson employee who got the alliance up and running in April 1991. He agreed to an interview with the Fifth Estate, but then backed out. On the board of the alliance were academics, business people, municipal politicians, many of whom had connections to the forest industry. There were also some industry executives. The chairman is one of the province's most colorful characters, Jack Monroe, the former head of the International Woodworkers Union. Monroe was recruited by an old friend, the CEO of Macmillan Bloedel, Ray Smith. So what does his appointment say to you?
His appointment says that that they wanted someone there to protect the industry's interests because that's what Jack has done all his life.
The alliance portrays itself as an independent body dedicated to informing the public on forestry issues. It claims to occupy a middle ground in the debate over forestry and even goes so far as to present itself as an environmental organization.
The true environmentalist believes we need an economy
and a balance between a good economy and the environment. That's what the alliance is all about.
You classify the alliance as being middle ground, but whose classification is that?
We are being widely accepted with open arms by the public. Finally, the public of British Columbia are saying, finally, we've got an independent body who is in the center trying to find, once again, a balance between a healthy economy and a healthy environment.
You don't believe that the fact that the alliance was set up by a public relations firm, spin doctors, in any way taints the alliance?
The firm advised the CEOs that they establish a citizens board, independent, not controlled by the industry. That's what they did. Now, Burson Marsteller or Gary Lee or anybody else does not run the alliance.
So there's no conflict here, even though the alliance gets most of its funding from the forest industry?
Not at all, because I've fought with these characters, for goodness sake, for 30 years. Not afraid to have a scrap with them about anything.
The Forest Alliance was clever in its recruitment of board members. One of them, Patrick Moore, was one of the founders of Greenpeace. But Moore no longer works for the environmental movement. In fact, some of his critics say he switched sides. Now he's a paid consultant to the forest industry, and he's more blunt than Jack Monroe about the Alliance's purpose.
The fact of the matter is, this is an industry initiative. There is no getting away from that. And the only issue is whether or not, this is as far as I'm concerned, whether or not it is a reformist initiative that is actually going to help bring about positive change, or whether it is a reactionary movement to defend the industry against criticism that is justly due.
But it is operating in the interests of the forest industry.
As it was always intended to. It operates at arm's length from its funders. At arm's length is different than independent.
This program was produced and paid for by the Forest Alliance of British Columbia.
Under the guidance of Burson Marsteller, the Forest Alliance produced a 13-part television series and paid for its broadcast on BCTV.
If the forest industry doesn't survive, it's not just the loggers who will be hurt. It's the man and woman on the street, on the job, and in the home.
These programs look like documentaries. They appear to be open, unbiased presentations of the industry and its problems. But every program contains a bottom-line message from the industry to the public.
It is wrong. Clear cutting is a sound forestry practice. It is used extensively in Sweden and here in BC. The forest industry knows to stay healthy, it needs to change its ways.
Changing its ways, that's the second part of the Alliance's public relations campaign. The slogan is sustainable forestry, and the promise is that this time, the industry really is serious about changing decades of bad forestry practices. That is why Patrick Moore was recruited by the Alliance to draft a code of forest practices for the companies to sign, so the industry could be seen to be reforming itself.
But hasn't the forest industry, in fact, been saying for 25 years that they've misbehaved? What's different now?
What you're missing here is that they have realized that it is in their interest to be honest, and that it is in their interest to clean up their act. It's an issue of practice. It's an issue of how they're doing their job, and they've got to change the way they're doing their job.
The Forest Alliance and SHARE predict that if the environmental movement gets its way and preserves areas like Clayoquot, the industry and all its jobs will disappear. While it's true that some jobs have disappeared because of the preservation of old-growth forest, most of the industry's job loss of the past decade has been caused by mechanization, not by environmentalists.
In 1982, 1983, Macmillan Bloedel began to speed up their equipment. They began to mechanize logging operations. They began to change their markets and their products. They did a complete restructuring of their company. And as a result of, during that period, from about 1982, 83 up till 1987, we lost 3,500 jobs in this valley. And that's continuing to this day. And all of these jobs were lost without a single square inch of forest land base being removed in order to protect the environment. All of those jobs.
Is it fair to perpetuate the idea that it's the environmental groups that are solely responsible for job loss in the industry?
You're right. You can't blame massive job loss on the environmental movement. It's just that if you take away the land base, which, not the environmental movement, but the preservationists, want this huge land base taken away, then you've got nothing to build on.
You use this word preservationists. Can you tell me who are the so-called preservationists and who are the environmentalists in the Clayoquot Sound?
Well, I think the Friends of Clayoquot Sound, for instance, like that, I would characterize them as preservationists because they're really not interested in different logging practices. They're interested in preserving that whole area intact as it is.
And who are the environmentalists in this debate then?
We are. The community is. The chairman of the IWA is there. People who...
Macmillan Bloedel?
Macmillan Bloedel. I don't have any problem with that.
And the share movement continues to put out the same message. If only the preservationist bogeyman can be overcome, forest industry communities will face a long and rosy future.
We will continue to make sure that our industry is vibrant.
That is the great betrayal that I see that the share movement is perpetrating upon concerned citizens in community after community. These people's fears, I regret to say, are being preyed upon, but there is no strategy to deal with their economic and social concerns. They're going to lose their jobs. There's no question about it. A large chunk of them are going to be gone. And there is no advocacy through the share groups for those people who are going to be affected.
I think the share groups have been amazingly successful, I guess. There's been nobody else around that's speaking out for rural communities in a really vocal sort of way. And they've been able to do that, and I think that they've been quite successful in that.
High on the ridges above Clayoquot Sound, the arguments about share and the alliance are drowned out by the buzz of the chainsaws.